Hello and welcome to episode 11 in season 2 of the Off Ramp Project. It's all about power. I'm Carla McLaren, and I want to talk about power because if you've ever taken an off ramp, or if you've ever helped someone take an off ramp from something, a bad relationship to a person or to an ideology or to a way of taking care of themselves, a way of eating, a way of exercising, a way of doing religion or not religion, a way of being a group member or a family member. If you've taken an off ramp or helped someone take an off ramp, I think what you've done at the base level of it is reclaimed yourself, reclaimed your authority, reclaimed your agency, reclaimed your power. Because power, I know that power, the way that we have had it used on us, is mostly a negative thing. It's mostly a negative connotation when we think of power. But when you think of powerlessness, that's not positive, right? If you take power away and you're powerless, that's not cool either. So even in the language, we know that power has value. The problem is when the power is used against you in the way that it is in what I call hierarchies of human worth. When we looked at the patriarchy, and I think episode 4 in this season, in season 2, it's not the patri, it's the archy. What I was talking about is hierarchies, which is an archy. Hierarchies of human worth always create trouble because what they do is they create an artificial hierarchy where some people are the good and the wanted and the valued, and some people are the bad and the unwanted and the devalued, right? And in the hierarchy of patriarchy, there's only two like categories. You're either a man person or a lady person. So what happens with the people who are neither? Well, patriarchy doesn't like to look at that. Like patriarchy doesn't want to think about it because they don't know where to put things in a simple-minded system that has only two positions, right? But in any patriarchy of human worth, you have racial patriarchy, you have racial hierarchy, you have gender hierarchy, you have money hierarchy, where the rich people are at the top and I would say the poor people, but let's look at homeless people. They're usually at the complete bottom of that hierarchy of human worth. You have the hierarchy of handsomeness and prettiness, right? You have the hierarchy of weight, and it depends on what's going on in the culture. During times when there's starvation, it is noticed, then the hierarchy of weight becomes a higher weight because nobody can achieve it. And in times of plenty, the hierarchy goes to slenderness because very few people can achieve it, right? So it's still about power, right? About who has a choice to be slender in a time of overeating and too much food, and who has a choice to be heavy in a time of scarcity. Yeah. What happens in any hierarchy of human worth is that as people climb the hierarchy, or if they're born into it, as in patriarchy, they tend to have empathy delays because of the way that hierarchy makes them look at those below them, which is that they are beneath, sometimes beneath notice, but they're not as good, right? And so the empathy that a person should have for everybody, up, down, left, right, back, forward, it becomes kind of stilted and incomplete. And so at the top of a hierarchy of human worth, you will see empathy delays. You will see hypo empathy, not enough empathy for a whole human being. But at the bottom, you will see hyper empathy, because we not only at the bottom have to keep an eye on each other, hopefully to keep each other safe from the abuses of the system that we live in, but also we've got to keep an eye on the people above us, whether it is people who are more attractive, people who have the right weight of the historical period, whatever that is. We would look up at the gender that is supposed to be the better one, or the one on top, or the one in power. We would have to look up at the wealth. If we're in a hierarchy of human worth in the workplace, we'd have to look up at our manager, and then that manager's manager, and then the board, and then, right. So if we're at the bottom of a hierarchy of human worth, we've got to be aware of everything, every layer and every level. Whereas, let's say you're in the workplace and you are the owner, and there's a board under you, and there's, top management under that, there's middle management, then there's the line workers, then there's the janitors, and right. You have so little to look at the top. You have a sense of the people below you, but you don't have to, because all these layers are meant to sort of separate people from each other. And so when you get to the type of a hierarchy of human worth, you've often sort of fought your way up to see fewer and fewer people who are down below you, to pay less attention to them. And so your empathy has fewer inputs. Even though you're at the top of this thing and you sort of control all these people, controlling people is not an empathic practice in the way that they're done in hierarchies of human worth. So your empathy is going to get kind of twisted and reduced, whereas the people at the bottom would have their empathy twisted in an extreme way of ramping it up too high. So you have hypoempathy at the top and hyperempathy at the bottom. Now, what that means is, if you want to know anything about a social system and a structure that is hierarchical, you go to people at the bottom, because they're going to know the most, right? When I did workplace consultations, I would go in and kind of drop. I do this thing where I get under people. I don't know if you've seen sort of dogs do that, where they put their head down and they're like, okay, you're the dog in charge. And then I'm just like this, I'm no threat to anybody. Yeah. And I'm not doing it in a manipulative way, but I want to know what's true, and I want to know it quickly. So I get into what I call the gossip networks, which is, if you have a lot of gossip in a workplace or in a family, it's a sign that the hierarchical structure is too rigid. And it's got too many rules about what can be said to who and in what way. So when you see a lot of gossip in a social structure, you know that the social structure is very unwell. Not that the gossipers are, but that the social structure is forcing true information into the shadows, right? So gossip is one sign that you're in an unhealthy hierarchy of human worth. It's one of the ways to know that you're in an unhealthy system. And what's interesting is, workplaces where there's a lot of gossip, they make a rule that you can't gossip. And so gossip goes way underground then, right? Instead of saying, this is a sign that the communication here is not healthy, and that's something we need to take care of if we care about humankind, right? Instead, they just look at the very clear sign that there's trouble in the system and the power is being used inappropriately. And they decide, let's put more power on that. Let's crush that thing. I'll tell you a secret from the land of gossip. It will never work, right? You just lost right then. So if you want to know what's going on in a hierarchy of human worth or any unhealthy social structure, go to the people at the bottom. Go to the people that nobody wants to talk about. Go to the people who have been shunned and scapegoated and told that they are the lowest of the low. You're going to find hyper empathy there. You're going to find hyper social awareness. You're going to find, everyday social scientists who can understand the structure even better than the structure understands itself, right? So knowing that a hierarchy of human worth is using power inappropriately, and that we are in multiple overlapping hierarchies of human worth here, certainly in the United States and in many other places. We have a hierarchy of gender, really, really strong. We have a hierarchy of citizens versus immigrants, really, really strong. We have a hierarchy of wealth. The United States has done a hierarchy of wealth pretty much since the day we started, because only in the beginning, even though it was called a democracy, the only people who could vote were land-owning white men, right? Landowner means you're wealthy, right? You matter more than people who don't own land. You can actually vote, right? So that's kind of the hierarchy of human worth. It was whiteness, was wealth, was maleness. So there were three hierarchies of human worth working in the United States. Well, before it even became the United States, in the 13 colonies that were the original states of the Union. We also have now what's rising really in very, very disturbing ways is a hierarchy of religiosity. Yeah. And there's a lot of what's called Christian nationalism happening in the United States and other countries, where the idea, which is wrong, is that the United States was started as a Christian nation. And in fact, most of our forefathers were getting out of countries where religion was a part of the state. The separation of church and state was very intentional. Now, all of these men, I think, Freemasons, they all came from Christian traditions because that's where they came from, right? They came from Europe and the UK. And that's what it was. You were Catholic or Protestant, right? Those were the choices in this part of the world. But it doesn't mean that the United States was founded as a Christian nation. They just happened to be Christian peoples doing a thing, and they knew how bad it is to have religion and the state together. They'd seen it, everybody saw it, they didn't want to do it again. So right now there's a Christian nationalism really, really unfortunately coming up. And one of the things that I learned early on is that there's no such thing as a Christian. There's no such thing as this is what Christians believe. It is as if you say, this is what Black folks believe, as if Black folks have all got each other, in a WhatsApp group and they're deciding, what do we all believe? That's absurd. You know that's absurd. Black folks are not like this monolithic. They're humans, they're individuals. You can have Blackness and any other thing in the world, right? You're free. Blackness doesn't mean that you have to believe a thing or say a thing or know a thing. That's not real. But it's real. Oh, hold on. It's real in a hierarchy of human worth that has whiteness at the top and Blackness at the bottom. There it's real because hierarchies of human worth make everybody incredibly ignorant. And they just see people as class members. They don't even see them as individuals, but let's not do that. Okay. But Christianity is 1 million things. And if you can say, what is Christianity? Well, it's a belief in Christ as the Son of God. But who is the Christ? It totally depends on which area of Christianity you're in. What does this Son of Christ do? What is his attitude about, I don't know, divorce? What is his attitude about giving to the poor? What is his attitude about abortion? Well, in his day, he didn't have any attitudes about that. There's nothing about that. But everyone is attributing based on what they think Christianity is. They're making Jesus into that, right? But since the beginning of Christianity, there have been schisms and splits. As soon as someone said, let's have a Christian church, someone split off it, right? And the split started almost the moment Christianity was created. There were Paulists, there were Franciscans, there were, right? No, we're this part. No, we're this part. No, we're this part. So you literally cannot say what Christianity is, except there's a belief that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. That's it. That is the only thing that's similar. So you can't say this is Christianity. You can only say this is this schismatic, prismatic offshoot of an offshoot of an offshoot of a super offshoot of an offshoot of this part of Christianity. You can't nail it down. And even if you do, even if you finally get down to the very bottom of it and you're saying, okay, now we can say what Christianity is, someone's going to schism off, someone's going to split off. It's as slippery as a handful of salamanders. Christianity is. So you can't say this is the problem with Christianity. You don't even know. We can't even say it. Okay. So but you can talk about this concept of Christian nationalism, which is America's a Christian nation. No, it's not. And that the ideas of this specific schism of Christianity that arose in the United States and that is very white focused, although there are Black churches in the United States that are also Christian nationalists, but mostly it's white nationalists, right? They're wanting to have power over everything, which means we've got another hierarchy of human worth with Christian nationalists at the top. And I'm sure that there's Christian nationalist factions who hate each other and are schisming off right now. They're splitting off right now. So it's nothing that you don't want to pack a suitcase full of Christian nationalism, because that suitcase is going to blow up as soon as you get on the tarmac. Okay, it's just not going to work. But there's now that people who aren't openly Christian nationalists are not, they're not the good people, right? So the number of hierarchies of human worth that we're seeing in the United States at this time shows that we don't understand what power is. We don't know what authority looks like. We just know these violent, simple-minded hierarchies of human worth. And the reason it's important to talk about power is because you need off-ramps from these kinds of things. Cults are also hierarchies of human worth. They have, these are the bottom people and these are the top people, and you have to go through all of your levels and pay your money to become, this level of a person. And then you will be, next to God, whoever that is. And getting out of a cult, which I've done, getting out of a religious group, a religious identification, which I've done, getting out of an abusive relationship, which is a hierarchy of human worth, where you, as the person being abused, are considered less important, less valuable, less worthwhile than the person in charge. In each of these cases, you are reclaiming your power in yourself. You are not claiming a power like, I'm going to climb up the hierarchy of human worth and I'm all of a sudden going to be a Christian nationalist, or I'm all of a sudden going to be rich, or I'm all of a sudden going to be white. Well, you don't have choices about that. Or I'm all of a sudden going to be a male. You can do that, but it's an unusual process where you kind of realize, wow, I didn't know what the world was when I was living in a female presenting body. Now that I'm in a male presenting body, wow, okay, this is a lot. I didn't know how differently I would be treated. I see a lot of transgender people saying, wow, I had no idea that this was what it was to live in a female presenting body, or this is what it was to live in a male presenting body. I mean, that's how separated we are by these violent, kind of recklessly violent hierarchies of human worth. They make all of us less intelligent. They give all of us empathy delays and empathy problems. And so we need to retrieve our power from hierarchies of human worth and become people together again. I teach a methodology of working with emotions and empathy called dynamic emotional integration. And we're coming up on our 9th international cohort this year. So we've got people in, I think, 15 countries who are teaching dynamic emotional integration. And they are almost to a person hyper empathic, male, female, Black, white, European, American, Canadian, from all over the world. These are people who um, needed a process through which to understand emotions and empathy that was in and of itself empathic, right? So it's super empathy. The place we teach is called Empathy Academy, right? It's empathy all day. But I had to learn something about teaching with authority and power because most hyper-empathic people are allergic to power because of how it's been used against them their whole lives. Now, remember, people at the bottom of a hierarchy are almost always going to have to develop hyper-empathy as a survival mechanism. So most people who are hyper empaths, for whatever reason, exist at the bottom of whatever hierarchy of human worth they come into contact with, right? They've been trained into hyper empathy through the abuses of a hierarchy of human worth. So when they look up at power, because they're the ones who can look at everything, they just see there's nothing valuable here. I'm not going to do it. And so they would have a hard time teaching. My friend, the mythologist Michael Meade, has said that when you stand up on a podium or when you get up above and you go to teach, you take the place of the king in the psyche of the audience. And of course, that can be the queen or the empress. You take the place of the king, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? And I would have so much trouble going up on stage because I didn't want to be in charge of people. I'd never seen people be in charge in a way that wasn't creepy. So I didn't want to do that. But I would sometimes lose my audiences because someone would get nervous about someone not being in charge in the room, and they would stand up and do that thing that I call taking hostages. We're like, don't you think, and then they go into this, and they sort of take over the room. And I thought I need to figure this out because this is embarrassing and it's time wasting and it's rude to the people who came to hear me, right? I had to struggle with it so much. I found this book, The Power Manual by Cindy Suarez, and it's how to master complex dynamics. Now, notice that Cindy is a female, and a female is at the bottom of a hierarchy of human worth of gender, right? Cindy is also a Latina, right? So she's also at the bottom of a hierarchy of human worth in the United States of Americans versus immigrants, even though she's not an immigrant, she was born here, but she's got that view from the bottom that gives her hyper empathy and the ability to look up. But she was also able to look at what power is. And in her book, The Power Manual, she lists 5 types of power. And what I did was I wrote this in a teaching manual that I built for our community called An Invitation to Empathic Teaching and Learning. And I talked about the necessity of having leadership within the classroom so that the people who come to learn from you can learn from you and not some person who gets up and takes over from the audience. Don't you think? Like, no, if I did, I would be you. And who would want that? So let's start with authority. Authority is a form of power that is command and leadership that is recognized by yourself and by others. It's not enforced. It's authority that you've earned. The second is influence, which is the ability to create change without threats or force. So you can influence people by being a good role model. You can influence people by finding ways to do things that are really just smart. And so who wouldn't want to do them, right? These are forms of power, but they're not the ones that we talk about, and they're not the ones that I was avoiding on stage, and that many of my dynamic emotional integration licensees were avoiding. Now we move into coercion, which is the ability to pressure others to change. You'll see that in advertisements. There's a coercion toward, don't you think that it would be better if you didn't stink all day, so please buy my deodorant? And there's a coercive idea in there that I stink all day, right? but oh, maybe I do. Oh my gosh, I smell like a human. I got to go buy some of that stuff, right? So you can coerce people into doing what you want them to do. But there's always like a pressure. Then there's manipulation, which is the ability to create one-sided change that only benefits you. There's a way that coercion might benefit me if I did smell like a human, but it was a smelly human, and deodorant would help, right? But in manipulation, I'm not being given a choice. In manipulation, I'm being pushed in a certain way. And that's a form of power that I think most of us would not want to inflict on other people. And then finally, there's force, which is the ability to enforce change through threats and the removal of choice. Now, what's important about this force piece is that you can have a social structure that does it. A hierarchy of human worth uses force. It threatens just through the structure itself. If you're a female, you are never ever going to get up to the top because only males are there. Why are you even questioning it? It's ridiculous. And the removal of choice. There is no choice when you're in a hierarchy of human worth and there's only two members in it and you are the bad one, right? So a structure can use force. Now, understanding these kinds of power, now I have a choice when I go on stage, not to give up my power to the audience because I don't want to use force, manipulation, or coercion, right? Because those are not cool ways to be. I want to use authority. I want to use influence. I can be in power without engaging violence, without engaging force or manipulation or coercion. I can take over a room. I can be the king once I step up on the podium and I take the place of the king or the queen or the empress in the psyches of the audience. I can be the ruler of a land of milk and honey, right? I can be the ruler of a place where the birds sing and they actually fly in your house and help you clean, like in a Disney movie, right? My kingdom, my empire can be one where we can learn together, where we can learn what the emotions are, where we can learn what empathy is and how to work with it, where we can laugh together, where I can tell stories on myself, where I call myself out and I don't lose any of my authority because I'm still there caring for everyone, making sure that it's a lovely empire where we learn together. And then I step off the podium and I go back to my own life, right? It's a persona that I can use that I wouldn't use in my everyday life. I would listen to people and I would let them talk and I wouldn't, I would be a different kind of a person having a different kind of connection with people. But I know now when I step on the podium, it's my empire. And what kind of an empire do I want to make? Right? A beautiful one. It's going to be colorful. There will be rainbows. So there is a form of power that is empathic. Yeah. You don't have to give up power as a hyper-empathic person doing empathic things with emotions and empathy. You can be in front of an audience and you can lead while trusting everyone to maintain their own authority and their own agency and their own influence, right? You can trust people. It's a different kind of power. It's a different way of doing it, but you can. The problem is in a world right now where everywhere you look is a hierarchy of human worth that is about force, manipulation, and coercion. It's hard to kind of get heard, but there are places where it's happening. And that's what's so important to look at. It's why I talk about braver angels so much of the time, because their whole thing is, how do we get back to empathy? How do we get back to having the authority and trusting other people to have authority over themselves? How do we ask questions? I never thought of it that way. How did you come to this idea about the political world? What were the decisions that you, right? Instead of you're just wrong. And here's a hierarchy of human worth, me and you at the bottom, right? It's about how to reclaim our humanity, how to take an off-ramp from the extreme polarization that we've been pushed into, because there is no better way to control people than to create monsters and to pit them at each other. Basically, we're a bunch of pit bulls in a dogfighting ring, right? And the only people who benefit from a dogfighting ring are the owners of the dogs. The dogs don't benefit, right? The people who are betting don't benefit, only the owners of the dogs. And I'm not a dog, and I'm not owned by anyone, and I'm taking an off ramp from anything that treats me in that way. So when we looked at patriarchy, we looked at power that is poorly managed, poorly wielded. It injures everybody. Nobody in a patriarchy gets out alive. Patriarchies are just as gruesome toward male beings as they are toward female beings and gender nonconforming beings. It's not a good system for anyone. Power looks different when it's handled intelligently and empathically and with a care for everyone and with an egalitarian heart in it, that you and I are equal. We're not the same, but we have an equal right to exist. We have an equal right to our own experience, to our own opinions, to our own ways of being. It's only when we try to make hierarchies of human worth, it's only when we try to use force and coercion and manipulation to try to tell people that they're not okay in the way that they are. Yeah. So as you look at power, take a look at Cindy Suarez's The Power Manual, How to Master Complex Power Dynamics. She's at the bottom of 2 hierarchies of human worth. So she's got 2 lifetimes full of the hyperempathic knowledge of artificial and abusive structures. She's got this one. So thank you very much. I would like you to be able to take as many off ramps as possible if you find yourself in places where monsters are being made, where polarization is being pushed at you, and where you are told this is how it is and there's no other way. As if, for instance, Christian nationalism is the way to do Christianity. There's 1 billion ways to do Christianity. Or how many Christians are there in this world? Probably more than 1 billion. Probably maybe 3 to 4 billion. I'm not sure. So there's 3 to 4 billion ways to do Christianity, because no matter what you do with your force and coercion and manipulation, people can always take an off ramp, right? In the book, Escaping Utopia, my colleague Janja Lalich and I studied 65 people who grew up in cults, really powerful cults, ones you would have heard of and ones you never heard of. They grew up there. They were educated there. They or miseducated, because most of them didn't get any normal schooling at all. They studied the Bible. They studied whatever their leader wrote. They did not get an education. Many of them didn't have jobs. They didn't have money. They took an off ramp. They were able to get out as children or as young adults who had no bank account. They had no credit cards. They didn't even know what those were. They'd never applied for a job. They didn't know how to get an apartment. And they got out of these powerful, powerful systems where every level of force and coercion and manipulation and power were being enacted upon them. And they got out. As we look at the situation in the United States, and I've said this before, as Katharine Hepburn in the Philadelphia story, The Time to Make Up Your Mind About People Is Never. People are getting out every day, and they just need better ways to look at power, better ways to look at authority and influence, better ways to engage across areas of difference. We can do it. We can do it. Everything's really bad right now. But I think, and I hope what we're seeing is, wow, the way we're doing it is extremely damaging to life and everything that is worth having. The hierarchy of whiteness, of maleness, of wealth, of Christian nationalism, each one of them creates untold suffering and meaningless suffering, right? Life, just as you live it, is going to give you enough suffering. You don't need to make any more. You don't need to make entire structures that are going to create more suffering. The suffering will handle that, right? You're going to lose your parents. You're going to lose your loved ones. You're going to be ill. You're going to, there's going to be loss throughout. There's going to be tornadoes. There's going to be earthquakes. There's going to be hurricanes. We got enough loss and pain and suffering. That's fine. A normal life has enough of that. You don't need to make hierarchies of human worth to increase suffering and to destroy things, right? When you see a hierarchy of human worth, you can say, nope, I'm going to go find some better people to hang out with. Oh, I just created another hierarchy of better people versus worse ones. But you can say, I want better structures. I want an egalitarian structure. I want us to be together in a way where we both have power, right? We both have the power of agency on autonomy and authority and influence over our own selves. We can take an off ramp no matter what, no matter how much money we spent to get into the trouble we got into, we can take an off ramp. And what that means is reclaiming our power. Thank you. I'll see you next time.